I really love thinking about these virtues. They're also thou shalt nots that the spiritual life requires, and like they are shared cross-culturally, but in the West, the 4 ethical commandments in the Decalogue pretty well tell the story. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not lie, bear false witness or lie, and thou shalt not covet. Those are there too, and in longer seminars, I touch on them, but I do it by way of duty, because those are like stoplights. You know, don't go. And nobody likes stoplights. But they're necessary. We know that traffic would just be chaos, and so would human relations, chaos without them. So it's important that we be aware of them, but I don't much enjoy dealing with them. But when we get to the virtues, those are like green light. Come. And you know how much we like green lights. In fact, I once told a Muslim friend of mine that who was riding with me, and we came to through a green light, and I said, when I'm alone in the car, you know, and it's just turning yellow, but you figure you can, if you step on the gas, you can get through it. Why, if I'm alone in the car, I often find myself exclaiming, Alhamdulillah. In other words, praise be to Allah. I made it. So we're on the green lights this morning, and the third one is veracity. And before I launch into that, I've been using the Western terms, humility, charity, veracity, but Asia puts it in, goes in, they're the same virtues, but they get to them, you might say, by way of the back door, which is a metaphor for what they talk about more, namely the 3 poisons. And the 3 poisons are greed, hatred, and delusion. And you can see they match up isomorphically, just in different language. Greed, gimme, is the opposite of humility, which is not regarding oneself as more than one. And hatred is the obvious opposite. And delusion is obviously the opposite of truth or veracity. I once asked an Asian teacher, here after he gave me his answer, I felt like a crass Westerner. I said, why do you put the emphasis on the negative, on the poison? Because they call them poison because the task is to expel these 3 poisons incrementally, go as far as possible, get all 3 out of your system, and once they're out, or as they go out, they open up space through which the virtues will enter automatically. And as I say, crass Westerner that I was all imbued with, accentuate the positive, eliminate the negative, don't mess with Mr. In-Between. You know, Westerner, that was my attitude. Why do you dwell on these negatives? And he said, there is a reason. He says the virtues are important, but they're out there. We aspire to them, whereas the poisons are right here. And we're in more direct touch with those, and therefore, practically speaking, we can go to work on those more effectively, even though he said it does come to the same end. Now, veracity. I'm going to tell you an anecdote, a true anecdote, which I think will get the basic point across more effectively than spending the same amount of time on abstraction. Though I will begin with the abstraction. The scientists tell us that a ray of light coming towards the Earth, if it passes close enough to a large body of mass, why, it feels the gravity and it bends inward towards it. And that's a very good analogy because when we look out on the world, we don't look objectively to see things exactly as they are. Our gaze is pulled toward by the gravity of our egos, our massive, noisy egos. And so we distort our view of the world by our own prejudices for and against. And so the abstract point is that veracity does begin with one of the ethical precepts in the Decalogue, the don't lie. Though let me say that none of the traditions are just totally absolutistic about that, especially those of East Asia, where courtesy in traditional China was a practiced virtue. And so they make room for what we would call a white lie. They're not just rigid about absolute veracity of every word and everything you say. Suppose you've been to a social evening and you leave and you say to your hostess and host, I had a lovely time. Well, maybe you did, but we won't analyze. We won't probe that point too far, because they say being aware of other people's feelings, one should couch your language taking their feelings into consideration. But this precept, bear no false witness, is only the runway of the virtue of veracity. And one takes off from that in practicing this virtue until you reach cruising altitude, and that is rising to a sublime objectivity wherein you can see everything exactly as it is, not deflected by your own prejudices for or against. And that is what my anecdote is about. Twice, Kendra and I have taken groups of students, 30 students drawn from colleges and universities all over the country in a special program full college credit for 9 months around the world, studying cultures firsthand on location. And in the second one of these trips, the first time we went to Japan and then ending up in England. This time we went west to east, so Japan was our last stop. And I said to the student, now I'm going to give you a choice for your academic work in these last 7 weeks. Your assignment is to understand as fully as you can the religions of Japan. And we can go the normal route, which means I'll give you bibliography. We had a traveling library with us. And you can study from the relevant books and passages. And then at the end, I'll give you a little quiz, and you can write me a little paper about what you've learned, the usual. But I said, this is a different experience, a different opportunity for you than most of those studying world religions back in the States do not have. And if you prefer, you can go not the typical academic route, but the experiential route. And I will arrange that you can spend the equivalent time, 8 hours each day for these 7 weeks, practicing through meditation Zen Buddhism. I knew I could deliver on that because we're in Kyoto, where I had done my training, and even though my Roshi had passed on, his heir was my Dharma brother, in that we both had the same teacher, the same Roshi, and in the Orient that counts for something. And it would be going against the teacher if you denied a legitimate request from your Dharma brother. 12 of the 30 decided to go the experiential route. So I went to the successor, same temple where I did my training, and told him my plan. And he knew right off that there was no way he could refuse my request. But he did say, you know, I'd like to have a look at these kids before I take them on. And so it was arranged that I would bring them at 10 o'clock the next morning. So at the appointed hour, we arrived. A typical Japanese scene in the audience room of the temple, a long table with 6 cushions on each side, and one at the head for the Roshi, and one at the other end for me. Cups of tea at each place, and a little bean cake. And so we took our places. And then the Roshi appeared, nodded, took his seat at the head of the table, and said, I understand that you are interested in entering Zen practice. May I ask, why do you want to practice Zen? A pall of silence and alarm settled over the room. They had heard about these samurai-like Zen Roshi, with their adage, 30 blows if you answer, 30 blows if you don't. And this was, their eyes had fallen on the first Zen Roshi for maybe 2 minutes, and he was already asking them questions. Well, the anxiety in the room rose until somebody had to break it. And one of the students was a graduate student who had been admitted because of his keen interest in world religion. And apparently, he felt that incumbent upon him to speak for the group. And I can still remember his words, almost verbatim. He said, Roshi, for 2 years, I have found myself increasingly drawn to the teachings of Buddhism. But I keep hearing that there's something about these profound truths that you cannot fully grasp by your rational mind and must apprehend experientially. And so it's in the hope of understanding more deeply the truths of the Buddha through meditation that I want to practice Zen meditation. The Roshi looked sternly at him and said, that is not a good reason for practicing Zen. Immediately, everybody froze. I was rather proud of my student. I thought that on the spur of the moment, he had done a very good job. And then the Roshi softened a bit, and he said, the point of and purpose of practicing Zen is not to understand anybody's teaching, not even those of the Buddha. The object in practicing Zen is to come to the point where you can see the things in the world exactly as they are. Now, he continued, we don't do this. A young man falls in love with a young woman. I missed a step. He said, our minds are like a great round mirror, and objectively they will reflect anything you put before them. But do we see those things exactly as they are in their own right? No. We paint pictures on this big round mirror of our mind of the things in the world. And then he went on to say, a young man falls in love with a young woman. Is it that woman that he is in love with? No. He is in love with the beautiful picture of that woman that he has painted on the mirror of his mind. Oh, it's a beautiful picture for sure, but it is not the woman. And therein, he added, lies all manner of sorrow. He said it happens every day right here in Japan, just as it does in America. Now, he concluded, if you're interested in wiping the pictures of the things in the world from the mirror of your mind so that you can see them just as they are, then you may come at 5 o'clock tomorrow morning. And with that, he got up and headed for the exit. Just as he got to that exit, he turned around and added, I have only just met you, and I like you already. And with that, he left the room. Well, you can understand when I come to this matter of veracity, what comes first to mind is that anecdote, because I think it conveys the point of veracity, namely getting our prejudice out of the way so we see people and things exactly as they are in their own right, more than any abstraction on the subject that I could have mentioned. In fact, I think I can't think of anything more in an abstract way that I think would make the point any clearer.
How do we, in fact, practice seeing things as they are and not as the pictures we paint upon the mirror, without the secrecy which results from those who are in power, whether they are scientists or religious leaders, corrupting or influencing that perception?
Right. I'm going to have to circle that a little bit to make sure that I have the thrust of your question. And let me begin with secrecy. And there is a place, a legitimate place for secrecy, but also it can camouflage and just hide corruption. So I think I find myself necessary to speak to those two possibilities regarding secrecy. I'll begin with the veil that it erects for misconduct and keeping that secret. And that is despicable. It is contrary to the truth. And unfortunately, we've had a decade of fallen gurus with feet of clay, and that is horrible. That's hiding the way things are. So it's exactly the opposite of veracity. Now, the other side of this, the appropriate place of secrecy in religion. The Taoists have a phrase, it's in the Tao Te Ching actually, no 10 things tell 9. Now that's very profound. And one finds the equivalent, but not quite as graphically put, in all the traditions. In the New Testament, Jesus says, cast not your pearls before swine, because if you do, it won't do the pearls any good. They will be smashed by the swine's hoof, feet, and it won't do the swines any good. It will give them stomach aches. There are truths which are so subtle that they will be misinterpreted by those who have not reached the requisite level of understanding. And this is why there is a secret echelon in all religion. To refer again to Christianity, there is a passage where it is said that Jesus, on a massive gathering, spoke to them only in parable. And behind that is the notion, if you just give them the straight medicine, why then it would be misunderstood. My most recent brush with this, and maybe it should be kept secret, and I shouldn't tell you. Maybe it's inappropriate, but I think that I sense this as an advanced audience, and therefore I think that it's appropriate to tell you. And it has to do with the mind-altering agents. They used to be called psychedelics, but because the psychedelic 60s took a turn off course and turned these substances into a recreational use, a kind of constant hip party going on. Now the people who, a younger breed, who feel that there is spiritual potential in experiencing certain regions of the mind which can be accessed by meditation, but not by everybody because of the time involved and the talent involved. They call them entheogens. Theos is the Greek for God, and sort of God enabling. And there's no such thing, this may be the only thing about these substances that there's no controversy about. There is no such thing as the drug experience. There are always three things: the substance ingested, and then what they call set and setting. Set is the psychological constitution of the ingester, and setting is the ambiance in which the ingestion takes place. But when these three are properly aligned, I am persuaded that they can give direct access to authentic mystical vision. Now, this young breed that is trying to carve out an area in our society between anti-drug phobia on the one hand and pro-drug enthusiasm on the other, they came to me about 5 years ago and told me, I hadn't known they have an organization, Council on Spiritual Practices, that is programmatic and trying to carve out a domain for serious seeking and use on a limited scale of these substances. And I had experience because I was at MIT when we brought Aldous Huxley there for a semester, and he had written The Doors of Perception, in which, in his book, he said, without any question, mescaline, that's the substance he took, affords the most valuable experience open to human being short of the beatific vision. He did say it's not quite the equal of a full-blown mystical vision by one of the great mystics that occurs without such substances. Okay, he arrived in just the semester that Timothy Leary arrived at Harvard, Harvard having stolen him from Berkeley. And he had a research grant, which was a plum, 3-year contract to do research on behavior change. No strings attached. He could go about it any way he wanted. And the story is now pretty well known that en route from Berkeley to Harvard, he, on the side of a swimming pool in Cuernavaca, Mexico, somebody handed him 5 mushrooms, which he popped, and history has been different ever since. But he arrived there, he was totally blown away, and never did have a mystical bent in his bone, but this experience. So that's what he wanted to experiment with, whether behavior could be changed as a result of this powerful experience of another world. And as I say, he knew Huxley, mile and a half apart, they got together, and I was Huxley's social secretary for that semester. I wanted to spend every moment I could in the presence of that capacious mind and spirit. So before long, there were 3 of us. And as an anthropologist, I knew they have the phrase participatory investigation. You participate in what you're studying. So, of course, I had, in the course of the 3 years before the whole thing careened off course and produced a total mess, which sets this matter back a long way. But during those 3 years when the substances were not only legal, but they were respectable, here I was participating in a bona fide experimental project at none less than Harvard University. So in the course of those 3 years, I had 2 ingestions with each of the 3 prominent entheogens on the scene at that time, mescaline, psilocybin, and LSD. And then I remembered Alan Watts's adage, when you get the message, hang up. And after those 6 experiences, why, I concluded I had the message, because I was learning nothing more from subsequent experiences, and the bummers, the bad trips, which can be a part of it too, were beginning to increase. So I hung up and have had no desire to have any further experiences. There is one little footnote there. When I became involved with the Native Americans and worked with them for 2 years to win back their religious rights, which the Supreme Court had stripped them of, then I had for all night teepee in the meeting of the Native American Church, in the teepee. And there, of course, I didn't want to be, they were generous to include an outsider like me, and I, of course, wanted to blend in. So then I had, under mescaline, I had later in life but that was in line with duty, not out of desire. Okay, now, let me quickly, because I see hands already going up. So Bob Jesse, as president of this group that's trying to carve out a space for serious research, which was cut down by the drug hysteria, scientific research, and also 1 or 2 experiences for serious seekers. And so he came, told me what he wanted, and then he said, you know, over the years, 35 years, you have written 8 essays on the interlacing of these substances with various religions. Soma in India, the Eleusinian mysteries in Greece, and so on. Can we bring these can we publish these essays? And with that, he handed me the book, which ended up as Cleansing the Doors of perception. He had dug out all of those essays from the vault of university libraries. They appeared in the academic journal, and there it was, my book. Well, I said, I have to think about this, and meaning I have to talk this over with Kendra, because I could just see my academic reputation that I had worked so hard to build up collapsing overnight with the publication on this controversial subject. But we talked, when I started reading these essays, it was a very interesting experience. I got pulled in very quickly, and before long I found myself saying, hey, not bad. This is good stuff. Solidly researched, carefully reasoned. So in the end I said yes, and the happy ending of that, the first review I got said, it began, this is a courageous book. And my response was, to myself, was, he's right. All we need is a courageous author, because my knees were knocking together. But to my surprise, I've now seen about 35 reviews, all of them favorable. What they say, in effect, about time to bring reason to bear on this controversial and yet very important subject. Now, that's a long story about secrecy. I, to this day, never broach that subject to anybody because it could be taken wrong for recreational use or something like that. So I give that as a long-winded answer to the positive or good side of secrecy.
Thank you.
What is your single most important motivation for the body of your work? For producing the body of your work?
Yes. Easy to answer, truth. There's an adage in India, there is no right higher than that of truth. And I agree. And for me, from as far back as I can remember, 9 or something like that, what I wanted to know is the truth about the ultimate nature of things. And that has been my guiding star, and how I pursued it, as I indicated Thursday evening, has been mainly through doors that opened to me, and I just entered those doors seeking always paramount the truth about the ultimate nature of things.
Through all of your experiences, what was your most wonderful and what was your most fearful?
Okay. On the two parts, I cannot prioritize the most wonderful. I don't know. I don't want to get sentimental, but maybe meeting Kendra and that developing relationship. If I need, but then I've had remarkable epiphanies. The Maasai warriors in the Serengeti Plain, being lost in those plains and in danger when nightfall came of being eaten by lions, and how accidentally, synchronistically, or God working in disguise, the Maasai warriors who always kept to I could see the shadowy figures, but as I approached them, they receded. But then finally, two of them, saving my life. Remarkable experiences and eye-opening in the Zen monastery and koan training. There are a lot of those, but I cannot prioritize. The most difficult was the death of our oldest daughter at the age of 50 from sarcoma cancer, one of the most brutal forms. And that brought an anguish unlike anything else. But there was even a saving grace in that, because the way she rose to that ultimate test, and the way her family, she had converted to Judaism, and the synagogue just closed in around, was an inspiration. And so there was that positive side, but there's no question that the depth of pain was unlike anything else that I've experienced.
The comment is on a statement you made in your book to the effect that religious experiences do not create religions, but you cannot have religion without religious experience. And how does one?
I think the first part is not exactly accurate, because they begin with theophanies. You can call them revelations to the great prophets. So they begin in those powerful experiences. And the second part I stand by. I do not believe that a religion can long endure their absence. Now, did it include the entheogens in this?
You mentioned them.
Well, the question of now that it may be in our secular age more difficult to have those experiences, this is a very important question. And interestingly, just the day before I left on this trip, a message from the dean of the Episcopal Theological Seminary in Cambridge, Massachusetts, asked if I could come and spend a full day with their faculty talking about whether these can legitimately be introduced into the Episcopal Church. It's an open question. I don't know. But since that gong's going to ring almost instantly, and this will be my last chance, let me say that in Asia, not today, but the traditional China I grew up in, why when at the close of any speech, why the audience would clap, but the speaker claps back, because what is this business of elevating one person above all the others? So let me call on the ringer. We're right there, and when the bell rings, why then the whole room, I know you're well brought up, you're gonna clap, I know that. The whole room will explode in a riot of happiness and congratulations to all of us.